Hey ladies and gentlemen, how's it going? We've got something a little bit different here this week. Long story short, I was shopping around for some new theme decks to, upgrade, have some fun with, but the quarantine situation in Canada is making things a wee bit difficult. So instead, I decided for this week at least to just go full digital. Now, I didn't want to waste my precious PTCGO coins on something I know I could eventually get IRL, so I decided to grab a bit of a blast from the past. I decided to purchase two Torrential Cannon decks on PTCGO. Quite intentionally, actually, because everyone and their mom has reviewed the Relentless Flame Charizard deck, so, I thought, hey, Blastoise isn't getting enough love, it clearly deserves it too, so yeah, here we are. And it's not a bad deck, actually. The Blastoise package here is good enough, with the boss monster using its powerful Squall ability to check the top 6 cards of your deck and attach any water energy you find there to your Pokemon in any way you like. This is pretty good, especially as a means of powering up other attackers. And the Blastoise itself has one attack that lets you do 150 damage for 3 energies at the cost of 30 damage in recoil, which is fine, I guess. It's probably because the Roaring Resolve Charizard damages itself with its abilities, so the designer said this one has to damage itself too. There's also a nice Pidgeotto package here, which is a great way to boost the consistency of the deck. And while I don't know if it's something that people would lean on now, we definitely have much faster options. It is good for anyone looking to, just start out and dig a little deeper into their deck every turn. And as for the rest, there's not much that we can use for standard play, which sucks, but that's gonna happen when you're picking up something as old as this deck is. Still, there's just enough to work with here in order to create, an upgraded deck. So let me go away for a little bit and see how I can breathe new life into the legendary Torrential Cannon Theme Deck. Well, I literally had to throw away a solid 90% of the deck, but I think I've got a good budget-friendly upgrade to work with here. The idea is still to focus on the powerful Squall ability, using it to power up the few multi-prize attackers that we've added in. Pretty simple. So let's take a closer look here and see how this deck functions. Right off the bat, we've got a pretty standard 4-1-4 line of the Blastoise package, backed up by 4 rare candies, of course. As much as possible, we need to establish 1 or 2 Blastoise in order to start, turboing out energy for the rest of our Pokemon. Our first big attacker is Blastoise and Piplup Tag Team GX. It's a Blastoise, so there's that, and it has an attack that lets us accelerate any water energies we have in hand while doing a little bit of healing, which is nice. But it also has a GX attack that hits for 100 damage minimum while causing paralysis, which can be clutch in the right situation. But if you have 6 water energies attached, it hits for an additional 150, which is pretty solid. It's a nice follow-up to the first attack. You will take out pretty much everything in the game, and it's not that hard to do with 2 Blastoise on the bench using powerful Squall. Next, I've included a copy of Keldeo GX, mostly for Eternatus. Basically, if the Giant Claw is stacking its bench, then this can come in and use its GX attack to deal upwards of 400 damage, which easily takes out Eternatus VMAX. Oh, and it's immune to the attacks of GX Pokemon, which can be useful to buy you some time in certain situations, although, yes, Boss's Orders is totally a thing. I've also included Dubwool V to give you a nice, cheap, non-water attacker that can actually hit for big numbers in the late game. Its Revenge Blast attack does 120 damage for 3 colorless energy, and hits for an additional 30 damage for every prize that your opponent has taken, which can work out to a max of 270. Now, to round out our Pokemon lineup, I've included 1 copy of the Lapras from Team Up, which lets you inflict confusion or hit for multiplying damage if you attach more water energy through Hydro Pump. This is a great turn 1 attacker because you can confuse your opponent's Pokemon and slow them down a little bit, or you can hit for a lot of damage while only giving up a single prize. The Suicuine from Darkness Ablaze is likewise there to hit for decent numbers while only giving up one prize. Dedenne, of course, is there for draw power, helping us to thin out the deck so that Powerful Squall is more likely to hit water energies. And Oranguru is there to stack the deck with at least one water energy from your hand to ensure that you always get something out of Powerful Squall. It's also very handy, by the way, for saving rare candies from being discarded. I've also got a few ordinary rods here for recovery, which is, a given in any deck I think that relies on a stage 2 Pokemon. Sometimes you miss out on pieces, so you want to get them back. But here it's really good because Ordinary Rod specifically returns 2 Pokemon and or 2 energy to the deck, allowing Blastoise to better accelerate them with its ability, right? If they're going into your hand, it's no good to you for Powerful Squall, but if you stack the deck with them, you see where I'm going with this. I've also included 1 copy of Nessa and 2 copies of Training Court to help recover energy in a pinch, usually just to stack the deck with Oranguru, but also to grab back the odd Blastoise or Squirtle if you're really hurting for one. Oh, and obviously we're playing a very healthy count of water energy to give us the best chance at hitting Powerful Squall. And that's pretty much it. It's a thorough makeover, but one I think you can easily do with a few well-made trades and a few staples like the Trainer's Toolkit. So, with all that said, let's hop on over to the ladder and see how the old turtle holds up. The first round pits our fledgling Blastoise deck against the fluffy goodness that is Alchemy V Max. It's a battle of energy acceleration versus energy acceleration, and Alchemy is also bringing some serious firepower to the table. In this kind of matchup, the match is really decided by how quickly you're able to establish more resources on board than your opponent. These kinds of decks basically require so much setup that every turn you fall behind is more like 2 turns that just flew by. So in this case, it's a race against the clock for me to set up a stage 2 and prep an attacker with Powerful Squall against my opponent, who needs to essentially establish a stage 1 and then load their bench with enough energy in order to facilitate multiple powerful attacks. Alchemy VMAX is extremely dangerous because for a single Psychic Energy, it can accelerate an additional Psychic Energy to every Pokemon on the bench. That means getting upwards of 5 Psychic Energies in play in 1 turn. Now, in this particular match, my opponent decided that it was more important to load their bench with energy a couple of times rather than go in swinging, and this put me in a tough spot because while Alchemy could be felled with a few solid attacks, I would then be confronted with an army of psychic attackers with plenty of ways to mess up my board. Basically, my opponent had options. Now, the advantage that I have is that Blastoise itself makes for a good attacker in a pinch, and my other 1-prize attackers like Lapras and Suicuine can chunk most 2-prize attackers without setting me back too much. This came in handy because I was able to take 2 critical bites out of my opponent's Cramorant and Alchemy VMAX, ensuring that as long as Blastoise and Piplup didn't get wrecked by a surprise attack, I could come in and sweep the board. Now, things went a little differently because while Blastoise and Piplup did smash Alchemy and cut off any further energy acceleration, I didn't end up needing the extra damage from the GX attack, so by fully loading my tag team with 6 energies, I was setting it up to get annihilated by a Mew V, which is exactly what happened. Now fortunately I was down to 2 prizes, and that Cramorant V that I damaged before was looking as juicy on the bench as a Butterball turkey bursting with stuffing. It was a simple matter of bossing up the Cramorant and taking an easy KO on it with the regular Blastoise. No disrespect to Frostmoth, but hey, Blastoise can support the team and dish it out when it has to. Just saying. Next up is a match where Blastoise is objectively better than Frostmoth because of a peculiarity of mechanics. My opponent was rocking a very interesting take on a Sableye V deck, where instead of using the Galarian Obstagoon line to ping Pokemon and set up a KO with Crazy Claws, the damage counters get placed by Arctozolt and Cursula. Basically, my opponent would do everything in their power to punish me for attaching energy, which meant that I had to be extremely careful about how and when I attached. Basically, Blastoise and Piplup GX was out of the question. My opponent had placed down a rare fossil pretty early in the game, and seeing the Sableye, I knew what was up immediately, so I prioritized getting an attacker on board as soon as possible before damage counters would start stacking up, and I was able to set up Dubwool V early enough for it to take a key KO on an opposing Crobat V. But in the course of it, I got poisoned by the Crobat V, so immediately after taking my prizes, it became apparent that I would have to play a game of keep away with the Dubwool just to ensure that I didn't fall behind in prizes too quickly. Now, my opponent oddly enough served up a Cursula in an attempt to further punish any energy attachment, probably thinking I was going to go crazy with attaching for the hand, but my opponent also didn't have any psychic energy on hand, at least that I saw, because they never attached to it and basically left the Cursula there as a sitting duck. And while Cursula was sitting there, I realized that Cursula and Arctozolt, which was finally established on board, only punish energy attachment from the hand. Attaching from the deck doesn't trigger their effects, which meant that as long as I could stack my deck with water energy, I wouldn't have to worry about getting pinged. So after taking the KO on Cursula with Blastoise, it boiled down to a game of making good trades against my opponent. Blastoise, the stage 2 baby Blastoise, was able to smash Sableye V for a good chunk of its HP, at least 75%, which meant that if my opponent left their active Sableye in to take a KO, I would immediately take the revenge KO for game, which forced my opponent to make some costly switches and waste resources in an attempt to keep a healthy Sableye forward and ready to deal out damage. Now, since my two Dedenne were unscathed, my opponent didn't even really have the option to boss them up and take the KO, which meant that I could just trade Blastoise to do damage until I could finally land a finishing blow on one of the Sableye, which is what happened eventually because my opponent only had so many and they couldn't keep switching around without falling extremely far behind. And I really have to say here, if I was rocking Frostmoth, I would have been annihilated. But because of the funny distinction in the opponent's card text, in that, hey, you're going to get punished if you're attaching from the hand, but not from the deck, I was basically able to squeak by and flood the field without having too much to worry about, which is kind of cool. This is legit a situation where you may want to consider Blastoise if all of a sudden the meta becomes flooded with Cursula and Arctozolt. Just saying. Well, that honestly went better than I thought it would. I have to admit that in knowing I had to throw out most of the original deck, I could have taken this in a number of different directions. I had a Lapras VMAX version, a version that actually included Frostmoth, and one that was just pure Blastoise, baby Blastoise. But ultimately I wanted to go with this more tame but relatively workable build, and you know, it did well enough. Upon reflection, I actually think this deck as a base has become a lot better now because of all the ways you can stack energy in your deck. Ordinary Rod and Oranguru make this deck so much better, and with the assortment of powerful water type attackers available now, you can pretty easily make a nice water box deck with, you know, this Blastoise as the foundation. Yes, 9 times out of 10, Frostmoth is more consistent and in many ways makes this Blastoise a moot point, but if you don't have Frostmoth, then yeah, this works just fine. Also, to its credit, this Blastoise can actually defend itself, unlike Frostmoth, so there's something to be said for that. And you know, you can't beat the generous amounts of nostalgia baiting here either, because Blastoise. So hey, if you're just starting out or you're looking for a creative challenge, definitely pick up a pair of these decks on PTCGO. But really, I have to stress, just get it digitally. I looked, the actual deck costs some serious scratch IRL, so, you know, maybe don't bother with trying to get your hands on the deck specifically. If you really, really, really want to play with the actual cards, just keep an eye out for the singles of the Blastoise line and, you know, snatch them up when they come. Really, too, it's just that Blastoise you need to worry about. You can use any Squirtle or Wartortle if you want, because these ones in particular, they don't really help you get the Blastoise itself out. So yeah, just keep an eye out, I guess, for a playset of the Blastoise from Team Up, and you're good to go. It is way more cost efficient. And don't even get me started on how much the Charizard deck costs. $250 for some mint condition ones on eBay in Canada, because you gotta love scalpers. And that wraps things up for this week. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm still hunting for good theme decks to upgrade, so definitely leave your suggestions below. It's a little late in the game, but I've also set up some social media for the channel. You can now follow the show on Twitter and Instagram. Details are in the description below. And it's a great way to stay up to date on upcoming episodes, send me suggestions for future episodes, and generally chat about the game we all love and enjoy. I'm also looking at setting up a Discord server, so hey, there's that. And yeah, guys, until next time, take it easy.